welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We do have a little bit of breaking news. We don't have necessarily the time to fully dive into it today, but did just get the news from Ian Rappaport that the Chiefs and tight end Travis Kelce have agreed on a 2-year extension. Supposedly makes Kelce the highest paid tight end in the league. So again, we have so much going on today with the NFL draft, with all of this NBA playoff action from the weekend. So definitely check us out on socials and on YouTube. We'll touch more on that with maybe a short and then get into it more in depth tomorrow. But we just have too much to get to right now. And we are going to be talking some NBA playoff action. And I wanted to start off this segment by talking about the New York Knicks and Jalen Brunson. Brunson is officially back after having a little bit of a slow start to his 2024 NBA playoff campaign. He is now dropping 47 points, adding 10 assists to that in the Knicks 76ers series as they take a 3-1 series lead. Brunson in this game, like I mentioned, 47 points, along with generating an additional 23 off of his assists to fully account for 70 points of the Knicks 97 as they pull away from the Sixers, take a very tremendous lead in this one. I mentioned before, I didn't think that Brunson's slow start was really all too much of a concern, but it was something to at least sort of acknowledge and monitor a little bit. Being a small guard, taking on that type of a very heavy offensive load, he wasn't great to start off the playoffs, and it shows you how important it was for his other role players to be able to help pick up the slack a little bit and help them deliver the wins at home when we see role players sort of, contribute more when they're at home, and then it's the stars who can really take over these road games, and that's what Brunson did in Game 4. And he really is proving to be one of the best free agent signings of the 21st century, and I really don't think that that's hyperbole. He has been such a difference maker for this New York team and has helped sort of rearrange the trajectory that the Knicks were on, where this was a very middling team. They were just sort of hovering around. There wasn't really any sort of a spark, and this is a star now that has come in and captured the love of the entire city, and it's made not just the Knicks team and their organization, but the NBA more fun, because as obnoxious as Knicks fans can be as time, they are one of the biggest brands in basketball, and it's just more fun when they are competitive, and here they are now with their 50-win season and likely going to be cruising into the second round for their second consecutive year. Now, there is still maybe a little bit of a concern in terms of their additional role players. Now, I think that ultimately when it comes to their chances, it feels kind of Brunson or bust to me. Now, again, they've had the likes of some big-time players step up for them. You have Isaiah Hartenstein, who's been a monster, has really given Embiid a lot of work. We're going to be getting into Embiid shortly after this, but he's been a monster for them. Even last night when he didn't necessarily play quite as much, but Josh Hart, who went 0 for 7 from the field, added an additional, I believe it was 15 rebounds? It was 17 rebounds, and he was tremendous in this game as well from an outside of the scoring standard itself. And for the Knicks, again, I think that they have a golden chance to make a run at not just the conference finals. They could definitely pose to be a tough matchup for whoever comes out of that other side of the bracket, likely going to be the Celtics. Now, I feel like they still have maybe another year of integrating themselves a little bit more. The Julius Randle conversation with them in terms of, is he going to be around for next year? Are they better off without him? I don't know if I'm fully ready to go there, because in games like yesterday, when there is a little bit of stagnancy, it is very Brunson or bust. And I think that Julius Randle, for all of the sort of uglier parts of his game, he does provide a very high level of scoring when he's fully there. So definitely let me know what you think in the comment section about Julius Randle's fit into this whole Knicks picture. But on the note of the 76ers, because they are, of course, on the other side of this whole equation, and they are sort of unraveling a little bit. And that being said, this season was already sort of lost once Embiid went down with that torn meniscus injury in January, I believe it was, where their expectations from there were immediately sort of shot. Now, I'm sure to some degree, people sort of talked themselves back into it. They rode into the playoffs on an 8-game win streak in the regular season, won a good game against the Miami Heat as well in the 7-8 matchup of the play-in tournament. But ultimately, it just seems like there's a lot of holes on this roster, and I think that I'm not sure necessarily what the steps to sort of correct all of this is, because of the fact that Joel Embiid is such a hard evaluation at this point, because he goes out and he gets you 50 points in a game 3. He's automatic from 3 and on good contests, and he's getting everything that he wants. So, he's at least healthy enough for that, but at the same time, the defensive effort levels is just sort of not there whatsoever. And his stats are still good, because he's averaging, I believe it's 35 points per game, 9 rebounds per game, 5.5 assists per game. But the impact doesn't necessarily feel like it is where it should be. And impact can be a little bit of a, subjective measure, because there isn't necessarily one statistic that translates to what impact looks like. But if you look at the fact that the Knicks have been severely out-rebounding the 76ers in this series, specifically on the Knicks offensive end, getting themselves second chance opportunities, it's in large part how they were able to take down the Cavs last year. But Joel Embiid is significantly the biggest player in this series, and especially with Mitchell Robinson out this past game, hasn't even necessarily been playing heavy minutes as it is, but he should be, in a perfect world here, dominating the glass a little bit more. It's just the fact he's clearly not 100%, but at the same time, he just never is 100%, and it's difficult. And he's dealing, of course, with not just this knee injury, but also the fact that he's dealing with Bell's palsy too, and it's just a very, very hard evaluation of Joel Embiid at this point, especially when he's sort of talking and acting like a villain a little bit in some of these instances, talking very confidently after game 2, isn't talking about the injuries, playing a little bit of a villain role in game 3 with some questionable plays there. Obviously, the Mitchell Robinson grabbing at the ankles is the one that gets the most amount of attention, but then he comes out and is blaming the Philadelphia crowd for letting so many New York Knicks fans show up to this Game 4 matchup. It's just, it's a very hard balance between Embiid, the 76ers team, and everything. And I love Tyrese Maxey. I have for a long time. He hasn't necessarily been... he's averaging 29 points per game. So I want to preface this with the fact that he hasn't been bad by any means. It just feels like he's been maybe a little bit absent in some of these, crunch time matchups where I thought that he was really good in game 2. He should have been the reason that they won game 2 if it weren't for the collapse there at the end. But it just seems like with a limited version of Joel Embiid, you would like to see Maxey step up a little bit more. And this is his, obviously they went to the playoffs last year. He just wasn't necessarily as big of a part of it. And now he's in a situation where he is the number 2. And in some of these stretches, they're going to need him to carry, and just doesn't really feel like he's quite at that point yet. So, I don't know. It's technically not over here. This is the Knicks series to lose, though. I feel like they should be good. This is going back to New York in a game that can potentially, clinch them moving on. The odds are stacked against the 76ers. And speaking of the odds being stacked against a particular team, the Los Angeles Lakers staved off elimination with their win against the Nuggets over the weekend. They were down 0-3 in the series. They looked very dead after Game 3, where you have LeBron James just sort of by himself, dribbling it off of his own foot out of bounds, and then he's yelling at Taurean Prince because he didn't like the screen that he was setting. You had Anthony Davis sort of dogging it intensity-wise on the defensive end for some instances late in that game, even though we're going to talk about him as well, but I think he's been tremendous for the most part in this series, but this looked like a team that was sort of limping to the finish line. After game 3, you had D'Angelo Russell sitting away from the rest of the team during a huddle late in that one as well, but they responded nicely with their win on Saturday. AD was terrific once again. I feel like he has been, really matching Jokic for most of this series, and it just hasn't necessarily been viewed that way by the public because of the fact that you also had him sort of disappearing at the end of that game 2 where he only took one shot as the Nuggets came back from down 20 in the second half to win that one. But he's been very good in this series. 25 points, 23 rebounds, 6 assists in their most recent game. LeBron James was looking to be a little bit more of an aggressor, not a facilitator. He goes and gets his own, drops 30 points. And then you got some good performances from D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reeves, both adding 21 points as well. So I think that it's all but done for the Los Angeles Lakers, but there is a little bit of a path here for them to potentially be the first team to come back 0-3. Now, I'm definitely not picking that myself, but they're now down 3-1. They are going to Denver again to play their next matchup. As things are currently stand, Jamal Murray is listed as questionable with a calf strain, so he could be out for Game 5. The Nuggets are still obviously very good and very talented, but they are a different team when Jamal Murray doesn't play for them. There just isn't that second creator outside of Jokic, and sometimes you'll get the more aggressive version of Jokic, but if it's, just Jokic versus Anthony Davis and they sort of take away his passing lanes necessarily by just playing him straight up and causing him to play that one-on-one matchup against Davis, I feel like there's a good chance the Lakers could come out of that one. And then if that's the case, it's Game 6 in LA, and then Game 7, anything can happen. So again, I say all of this, more likely than not, it's going to be the Nuggets winning, but just saying there is a little bit of a path there. But we additionally had some other really good games. The Clippers Mavericks one stood out the most. We have a version of James Harden who, this is why they made the trade for him. There's a lot of unreliability with their stars, including James Harden, who hasn't necessarily had a great playoff reputation of his own, but knowing sort of this is their opportunity prior to them moving into their new arena next year. They needed to load up on star power. They already have depth. They just sort of shed some other options that weren't necessarily, in their top 7-8 man rotations. I know that, a couple of them got some minutes for them, but ultimately this is a move for LA. This is why you want to get him, because he and Kyrie were just facing off in this game. And of course, if you didn't watch the game, the Clippers were up by over 30 points in the first quarter. The Mavericks stormed all the way back to not just make it a game, but actually took the lead at one point. They couldn't hold on, though. Paul George buried them with this unreal 3 from the corner over Derrick Jones Jr., borderline over the backboard when he knocked down the corner 3. And, Paul George is another one where don't necessarily know what you're going to get from George on a given playoff game, but he does have tons of talent, of course, and he is, moments like that are why he is going to get paid by somebody when he becomes a free agent this offseason, whether it's still with the Clippers, whether it's elsewhere, that's still to be seen. But this series is going to be so fun. Now knotted up at 2-2. The Kawhi injury piece of this is very interesting because obviously Game 1, they just they destroyed the Mavericks in Game 1, and They then bring him back for game 2. He was questionable leading up to it, and he just never really seemed to be a comfortable fit for them. He looked a little bit better in the second half of game 2, a little bit better in game 3, but still just didn't seem like he was the same version of himself. There's, of course, the clip that's circulating of him sort of holding on the rim after catching a lob dunk where it looked like he was scared to drop to the ground. And it's clear he's not 100%. He ends up sitting this game and they win. So definitely an interesting conversation in LA. The reality is, if he wants to play, you can't keep him out, but they might be better off without Kawhi Leonard as things currently stand. Let me know how you feel about that. Last couple notes here. Again, we've had such a busy weekend here in sports, but was everybody sleeping on the Oklahoma City Thunder? And I was partially guilty of this as well. I thought that if Zion Williamson were to play in this series, that the Pelicans could potentially make it difficult for them, even when they had, won game 1. I was looking at the series odds for the Pelicans, and the fact that they were such underdogs at least made me sort of bat an eye, because of the fact that I did think that this was going to be a competitive series, and since then they have just proven that to be entirely wrong. They are rolling right now, up 3-0, have a potential to sweep the Pelicans. And as much as the Pelicans are definitely reliant on Zion Williamson, I do think that there's a real element of this Thunder team that they're just legit good. They've told us this all year, and as much as they seemed like they were more built for regular season success than postseason success, and again, I'm not trying to get carried away right now because of the fact that the Pelicans are a flawed team, but the Thunder are more ready than I think that a lot of people were willing to give them credit for. And as a result, they now have a 3-0 lead. Final thoughts here is on the Indiana-Milwaukee series, where the Pacers take a 3-1 lead over the Bucks. Devastating news for Bucks fans when Damian Lillard was ruled out with that ankle injury in game 3. I think it was somebody came down on his ankle. I don't have the notes in front of me at this very moment, but he ends up being able to tough it out, but they fall in that one in what was an incredible game on Friday. Ends up going to overtime. Chris Middleton was phenomenal in that game, and somebody that, as much as you maybe want to count him out, you never fully can, because that ridiculous three-point shot that he hit to send the game to overtime is something that we have seen in the past. And I thought that he was pretty solid too yesterday, but the level of offense, from Milwaukee just isn't there. You, of course, lose your top 2 scorers, so that's never going to be easy, but also their defense still is so flawed, and against this Indiana team, it's just a mismatch. And in terms of what do the Bucks do from here, maybe Lillard can play in game 5 for them, but Giannis, I would not be rushing back with the odds stacked against them already, knowing what could potentially be at stake for the Bucks if they were to make Giannis's injury worse for a little bit of a long shot to come back in this sense. I think that it's going to be interesting with the Bucks, and I'm sure we'll talk more about them as the offseason comes along. They're probably going to run it back next year as well with this same duo, try and get a little bit more of a connection between Lillard and Giannis. I think that Brook Lopez, as much as offensively he had some big-time moments, he was just about all the Bucks had, him and Middleton offensively yesterday, but he's had some really tough moments. And again, Indiana is a tough mismatch for him on the defensive side of the ball, but he seemed pretty out of place in a lot of these moments. And there are instances where, if Miles Turner is trying to back him down, he can play some good one-on-one defense. But I felt like Brook Lopez definitely looked like an older version of himself over the weekend, and not necessarily in a great way. But let me know what you think about this. I know that we were unable to cover everything, but again, tons to get to. We are going to be touching on the Timberwolves sweeping the Phoenix Suns on the other side of the break, so stick with us and we will be right back.